Lyra Soren balanced the silver tray carefully as she walked toward the private war room. Inside the palace, everyone knew two things about Lyra. She was always near the Alpha King, and she never caused problems. That was why no one stopped her in the corridor. A servant passed her quickly. "The council requested more wine," he said. Lyra nodded once. "I'm bringing it." At the end of the hall, the war room doors stood slightly open. That was unusual. Kaelor Vir never held council meetings carelessly. The Alpha King valued control too much for that. Lyra reached the door just as laughter echoed from inside. Then Kaelor's voice followed, calm, relaxed, certain. "I can do whatever I want. She'll stay." Lyra stopped moving. Inside, one of the councilmen laughed quietly. "You're confident." "I'm correct," Kaelor replied. Another voice joined in. "Even after the alliance announcement with House Varel?" A pause. Then, "She has nowhere else to go," Kaelor said. Silence hit harder than the words. Lyra stood perfectly still outside the door, fingers tightening around the tray. Inside, someone asked carefully, "And if she hears about the arrangement before it's finalized?" Kaelor answered immediately, "She'll adjust." More laughter. One councilman added, "That Omega's loyal." Kaelor's response came smooth and effortless. "She always stays." The tray nearly slipped from Lyra's hands, not because she was shocked, because suddenly everything made sense. The late-night meetings, the distance lately, the way he stopped explaining things to her weeks ago. She had thought Kaelor trusted her, thought the quiet closeness between them meant something. Inside the room, chairs shifted. Conversation moved on. But Lyra no longer heard any of it. She stepped backward carefully, silent, controlled. Then she turned around and walked away from the war room without making a sound, without confronting him, without crying, without hesitation. And that was the moment. Lyra stopped belonging to him. By the time the palace guards changed shift, Lyra was already gone. Not through the main gates, not through the royal halls. Through the servant corridors no one important ever noticed. She moved quickly, carrying only a small satchel and the dark cloak she had stolen from the laundry room an hour earlier. A kitchen servant spotted her near the lower stairwell. "Lyra," the woman asked, "you're still working?" "No," Lyra replied calmly. "I'm leaving." The servant blinked. "Leaving where?" Lyra kept walking. "Away." The woman laughed nervously, expecting a joke. Lyra never answered. Minutes later, the east service gate opened briefly, then shut again. No alarm sounded. No one cared enough to ask why. Inside the palace, dinner preparations continued normally. Servants rushed between halls, council members drank expensive wine, and Alpha King Kaelor Vir entered the dining chamber without noticing anything wrong. He removed his gloves slowly and took his seat at the head of the table. A servant stepped forward immediately. "Your Majesty, your evening meal." "Where is Lyra?" Kaelor asked. The servant froze. "Your Majesty?" "Lyra," he repeated. "She was supposed to be here." The room quieted slightly. Another servant looked around nervously. "I thought she was with the kitchen staff." "She left earlier," someone else added. Kaelor looked up immediately. "What?" The servant swallowed hard. I assumed she had another assignment." "How long ago?" Kaelor asked. No one answered right away. That was the first problem. A councilman frowned. "Surely she's somewhere inside the palace." Kaelor stood slowly. The movement alone silenced the room completely. "Find her," he said. One guard hesitated. "Your Majesty, perhaps she simply needed—" "Find her." No anger, no shouting. That made it worse. The guards moved instantly. Servants scattered through the halls. Orders spread across the palace within seconds. But Lyra Soren was already beyond the outer district walls, and for the first time since entering Kaelor's palace, no one knew where she was. The palace search lasted less than 20 minutes before the first mistake became obvious. Lyra hadn't disappeared accidentally. She had left deliberately. A guard hurried into the dining hall. "East service corridor is empty, Your Majesty." Kaylor looked up sharply. "Empty how?" "No personal belongings, no bedding, nothing." Another guard stepped forward. The east service gate was opened during shift change. Kaylor's expression hardened instantly. Who authorized it? No one. Silence dropped across the room. One councilman frowned. "That gate is used by servants. She couldn't have gone far." Kaylor ignored him completely. "When was it opened?" he asked. The guard hesitated. "Roughly an hour after the War Council ended." That landed. Hard. Kaylor's eyes narrowed slightly. The councilman noticed immediately. "Your Majesty?" Kaylor didn't answer right away. Instead, he replayed the meeting in his head. The open door, the laughter, his own voice. She'll stay. A slow realization settled into the room before anyone said it aloud. "She heard us," Kaylor said finally. Silence followed. One council member shifted uncomfortably. "That's impossible." "The doors weren't fully closed," Kaylor replied. Another councilman tried to dismiss it quickly. "Even if she overheard part of the conversation, she knows how politics work." Kaylor looked at him, cold. "You think this is about politics?" No one answered, because suddenly it wasn't. A servant entered carefully. "Your Majesty," her room. Kaylor turned instantly. "What about it?" "It's cleared." "How cleared?" The servant swallowed. "She took only essentials, money, traveling clothes, nothing else." That confirmed it. This wasn't emotional. It was planned. Kaylor walked past the table immediately. "Prepare riders," he ordered. A captain stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we still don't know where she intended to go." Kaylor stopped at the doorway, then spoke without turning around. "She heard exactly what I said," he replied. A pause. Then, "She left because she believed it." And that was the first moment the Alpha King realized something dangerous. Lyra hadn't run impulsively. She had decided. The palace courtyard exploded into motion. Guards mounted horses. Scouts rushed toward the outer roads. Orders moved faster than the wind cutting across the stone walls. Kaylor descended the palace steps without slowing. A captain hurried beside him. "Your Majesty, trackers are checking the lower districts now." "She won't stay near the city," Kaylor replied. "You think she planned farther than that?" "Yes." The answer came too quickly to question. Kaylor grabbed the reins of his horse and pulled himself into the saddle in one smooth movement. A councilman appeared at the top of the stairs. "Your Majesty, this is excessive." Kaylor looked at him once. That was enough to silence him. The gates opened immediately. Riders surged out into the night. Hours later, they found the first trail near the eastern service path beyond the lower market district. One scout crouched beside the dirt road. "Small footprints," he said. "One traveler, moving fast." Kaylor dismounted instantly. "How old?" "Several hours." Another tracker stepped closer, frowning. "There's almost no scent." Kaylor looked down sharply. The tracker pointed toward the shallow river nearby. "She crossed through water repeatedly." A pause. Then the realization hit. "She's masking the trail intentionally," the captain said. Kaylor's jaw tightened slightly. Lyra had planned this carefully. Not emotional, not reckless, deliberate. The scout moved farther down the path, then stopped suddenly. "Your Majesty." Kaylor approached immediately. The trail split near the forest edge, 3 different directions. Minimal scent, minimal tracks. "She scattered the route," the tracker muttered. "Smart." Kaylor stared at the ground silently. Then one faint detail caught his attention. Broken bark on a northern tree. Fresh. Intentional. "She went north," he said immediately. The captain frowned. "That leads toward rival territory." Kaylor mounted his horse again. "Then that's where we go." "Your Majesty," the captain warned carefully, "if she crosses those borders." Kaylor cut him off. "She already did the moment she walked out." The riders moved again. faster this time. Because now the Alpha King understood the truth. Lyra wasn't trying to hide temporarily. She was trying to disappear completely. By dawn, Lyra reached the northern border fortress. Massive black gates towered above the mountain pass, marked with the crest of Alpha King Rhaegor Thorn. Enemy territory. Exactly what she wanted. 2 guards crossed their spears the second she approached. "Stop there," one ordered. Lyra stopped, barely. "What territory?" the second guard asked. "None," she replied. That answer immediately changed the atmosphere. The guards exchanged a quick glance. "No pack?" one asked carefully. "Not anymore." The first guard studied her torn cloak and exhausted expression. "You crossed alone?" "Yes. That's either brave or stupid." "I'm still alive," Lyra replied. Before the guards could answer, heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Both guards straightened instantly. A man emerged from the fortress gate dressed entirely in dark armor, his presence silencing the entire checkpoint without effort. Alpha King Rhaegor Thorn. Lyra recognized him immediately. Everyone did. Rhaegor's gaze settled on her first, not the guards. "You crossed voluntarily?" he asked. His voice was calm, controlled. Lyra nodded once. "Yes." "Running from someone?" "No." "Then why come here?" Lyra held his gaze directly. "Because your enemies won't send me back." One guard inhaled sharply under his breath. Rhaegor didn't react immediately. He stepped closer instead, close enough to notice the fading scent of Kaelor's territory still lingering on her clothes. "You belong to Vyre territory," he said. "Not anymore." Another pause. Rhaegor looked toward the southern ridgeline beyond the mountains, like he already knew who would eventually come searching. Then he looked back at her. "And if Kaelor Vyre arrives demanding your return?" Lyra answered immediately. "He can demand whatever he wants." That response almost earned a reaction from him. Almost. Rhaegor turned toward the guards. "Open the gates." The guards hesitated. "Your Majesty," one warned quietly. "Taking her in could start—" "I know exactly what it starts," Rhaegor replied. The gates opened slowly behind him. Rhaegor stepped aside slightly and looked at Lyra again. "You entered voluntarily," he said. "You leave the same way." Lyra walked forward without hesitation, and the moment she crossed the gates, Kaelor lost the right to command her back. Kaelor reached the northern ridge less than an hour later. Too late. The moment his horse stopped at the edge of the fortress valley, he saw the gates already open, and Lyra standing inside them. Safe. Behind enemy walls. A captain beside him swore quietly. She crossed. Kaelor said nothing. Below, the fortress guards immediately raised weapons at the sight of approaching riders. Rhaegor Thorn stepped out through the gates moments later. Calm, unhurried, like he had expected this. His gaze moved past the soldiers and landed directly on Kaelor. "She entered voluntarily," Rhaegor said first. Kaelor dismounted immediately. "Move aside." "No." The refusal landed hard across the valley. Kaelor stepped forward. "This doesn't concern you." Rhaegor almost looked amused. "You brought your problem to my border. It concerns me now." Then Lyra appeared beside him. Kaelor's focus shifted instantly. "Lyra." She didn't move toward him, didn't lower her eyes, didn't soften. That hit harder than the border itself. Kaelor took another step. "Come back." "No." The answer came immediately. One word. Final. Kaelor's jaw tightened. "You heard part of a conversation and decided to run?" Lyra looked at him steadily. "I heard enough. That meeting wasn't meant for you." "That's the excuse?" she asked calmly. "Not denial?" Silence. Rhaegor glanced between them, but stayed quiet. Kaelor tried again. "You misunderstood what was happening." "No," Lyra replied. "I understood perfectly." A pause. Then she said the words directly back to him. "I can do whatever I want. She'll stay." The valley went silent. Even Kaelor didn't interrupt. "You said it," Lyra continued, And everyone in that room agreed with you, Kaelor finally answered. Lyra, no, she cut in. You already explained exactly what I was to you. That landed. Clean, public, irreversible. Kaelor looked at her for a long second, then realized the worst part. She wasn't emotional anymore. She was done. The silence between the fortress gates stretched dangerously thin. Kaelor stepped forward first. She belongs to my territory, he said. Rhaegor answered immediately. She walked out of it. That doesn't remove my claim. Lyra laughed once, not softly, not kindly. Both Alpha Kings looked at her. You're still doing it, she said to Kaelor. His gaze hardened. Doing what? Talking about me like I'm property? Kaelor took another step toward the gate. Lyra, this ends now. Come back. No. Enough, he snapped. The single word echoed sharply across the valley, but Lyra didn't flinch. That was new. Rhaegor noticed it too. Kaelor's voice lowered. You don't understand what crossing into this territory means. Lyra met his gaze directly. I understood it before I crossed. You're standing inside enemy walls. I know. And you trust him? Kaelor asked sharply, glancing at Rhaegor. Lyra answered without hesitation. More than I trusted the man who said I'd stay no matter what he did. That landed harder than any insult. Kaelor went still. Rhaegor stepped slightly forward then, not aggressively, but enough to shift the balance clearly. She requested sanctuary, he said calmly. I accepted. Kaelor's eyes narrowed. You involve yourself too easily. No, Rhaegor replied. You lost control too carelessly. The guards behind Kaelor shifted immediately. Tension rose fast. One wrong move and the border would turn violent. Kaelor ignored everyone except Lyra. Come home, he said again. This time his voice lacked command. That was worse. Lyra shook her head once. You already had home, she replied. You treated it like certainty. Silence. Then Rhaegor spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. She remains here unless she chooses otherwise. Kaelor looked at him coldly. You think this ends with a closed gate? Rhaegor's expression never changed. No, he said. I think it ended the moment she heard you. That was the first thing anyone said all night that Kaelor couldn't argue against. Because it was true. And they all knew it. Kaelor didn't leave. Even after the fortress guards tightened formation, even after the northern gates began closing slowly behind Lyra, he stayed exactly where he was, watching her. Lyra, he said again. This time she sounded tired when she answered. Why? The question stopped him. Not because it was emotional, because he didn't immediately have an answer. You left without speaking to me, he said finally. Lyra stared at him. Would it have mattered? Yes. A pause. Then she shook her head once. No, she replied. You already decided what I would tolerate. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Kaelor stepped closer to the gate. You were never temporary. Lyra almost smiled at that. Almost. But I was manageable, she said. Silence. You expected adjustment? She continued. You expected loyalty. You expected me to stay after hearing you speak about me like I was convenient. Kaelor's voice lowered. I was wrong. That surprised everyone. The guards, the captains, even Rhaegor glanced at him briefly. But Lyra didn't move, because the apology came too late. You weren't wrong when you said it, she replied calmly. You were comfortable. That landed harder. Kaelor looked at her steadily. Come back with me. No, I'll end the alliance. That's not the point. I'll make this right. Lyra exhaled slowly, then repeated his own words back to him one final time. She'll stay. Silence spread again. You believed that completely, she said. That's why I left. The fortress gates moved lower behind her, almost closed now. Kaelor stepped forward instinctively. The guards immediately raised weapons. Rhaegor didn't move, didn't need to, because Lyra spoke first. "Don't," she said. Kaelor stopped instantly, and for the first time since becoming Alpha King, he realized power meant absolutely nothing when the person he wanted was already gone. The fortress gates closed completely. Heavy iron slammed into place between the two territories with a final sound that echoed across the valley. Kaelor didn't move. His soldiers stayed behind him silently, waiting for orders that never came, because there was nothing left to command. Inside the fortress walls, Lyra kept walking, no hesitation, no looking back. Rhaegor matched her pace beside her through the stone corridor leading deeper into the fortress. "You don't intend to return," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Lyra replied immediately. Rhaegor glanced at her briefly. "Not even for closure?" Lyra let out a quiet breath. "I already heard it." That answer ended the conversation for a moment. Behind them, distant war horns suddenly sounded across the border, low, threatening. The guards along the fortress walls immediately straightened. One captain approached quickly. "Your Majesty, Vair forces are still gathered outside." Rhaegor didn't slow his pace. "Let them gather. And if they advance, then they advance." The captain nodded and disappeared immediately. Lyra looked ahead calmly. "You think he'll start a war?" "No," Rhaegor replied. "You sound certain." "I think he finally understands something." Lyra glanced at him. "What?" Rhaegor's answer came simple and direct. "That control and loyalty aren't the same thing." Silence settled briefly again. Then Lyra gave a small nod, because that was exactly the lesson Kaelor learned too late. Ahead, the fortress doors opened into the inner hall. Warm light spilled across the stone floor. Safety, distance, choice, real choice. Rhaegor stopped beside the entrance and looked at her once more. "You crossed voluntarily," he said. "You remain the same way." Lyra held his gaze for a second, then stepped inside without hesitation. Behind her, beyond the closed gates and sounding war horns, Kaelor Vair remained on the ridge. Not as an Alpha King, not as a ruler, just a man who believed she would always stay, and lost her the moment she proved him wrong.